So welcome to the Reinhardt Peony Garden again, and if Ron, our wonderful videographer, gets the chance to show the scope of this garden right now in its third summer of blooming, it is amazing. Where we had only one bloom last year, we have probably 20. Where we had 10, we have 100, something like that. They're just everywhere. They're in prime right now. This is peak. This is early peak in that there are still probably 70 or so that haven't even bloomed yet. So for another 10 days, they'll be popping. And so if people come every 3 days, let's say, if they can, or watch our show, periodically you'll get a chance to see many of the blooms, not all identified, there's no time. There are 212 different varieties. We did the stats the other day, 186 different varieties will bloom this summer. There are 230 plants, only 26 will not bloom. So we're on our way. Some are just in their second year because we have to do replacements. The plant doesn't like it as much here as we want, or whatever, as it wants. And so we are working the garden toward complete established plants. And I'd say by 1 to 2 years from now, everything will be blooming. So that's 230 plant spaces. Again, 212 varieties. This summer, 186. You can come and count them. So we're going to look around. And today we're going to see at least one example of each of the 6 bloom forms. Bloom forms have certain things that are very definite, so then they get to qualify. But at the same time, you could say, how many temperatures are there between cold and hot? Well, that's how many variants there are in peonies. There's something coming up on 7,000 registered peonies across the world and counting, always moving in the direction. But hybridizing has to be very specific because peonies will make their own hybrids, but they don't count because they just are random. So we know somebody in Idaho with a garden with probably 500 different peonies, maybe 200 of them, she calls them seedlings, are just whatever the bees decided to pollinate. And they came up as a whole new surprise. So peonies are a versatile and durable plant, and this garden will be here in 100 years. Somebody else will be doing this tour. Okay, let's look around. So we're going to look for a single, and there are many in this garden, and it's almost overwhelming to even pick. And so I have a little guide here that's going to make sure I'm right. So most of the early bloomers are in fact singles. So last week we talked about that this is an Itoh, which is a cross between a tree and herbaceous. This plant right next to it is herbaceous, the normal peonies that most of us know, garden variety. They die back every fall. They must have a nice winter time for a rest. For whatever reason, they cannot survive if you plant them in Phoenix because they need that winter. Phoenix, Arizona. So this is an Itoh, a cross between the pollen of a tree, we'll maybe review it naturally here, and the carpel or seed pod or ovary or pistil. Those are different names for the female part of the plant. And so that cross creates this super strong plant. And this is a single because it has the pollen inside. You see the center. And the pollen surrounds the ovary, basically, the carpel, and then a row of guard petals. And this is kind of a double row of guard petals, so outer and inner guard petals. Fun to know that when it gets cold, especially if it gets cloudy, they seem to be photosensitive, and so as the clouds come in, the guard petals close. And maybe they're protecting the plant or the bloom, or maybe they're just saying if you leave it open and it rains, then the whole plant tips over. So maybe that's a little self-protection, I don't know. But that's something interesting. So it's better to be either coming into the sunlight, so that makes the blooms open up. So then the next form after that, and this should be another single, I'm going to check. Sonoma Velvet Ruby. It doesn't say, but it should be. Here you can see the pollen and the guard petals. So in a way, that's the simplest bloom. This is a single. This is one of my faves. This is the one that was found in 1750 on the hillsides of Turkey overlooking the Mediterranean. And it grows along the northern coast of the Mediterranean because there's more mountains maybe. I don't know that, but it's not the desert of Africa, North Africa. It's the Mediterranean, we call it, climate of southern Europe. And so this is like a balsam root is for Montana. It grows on the hillsides. It's just there. It's always been there. And this botanist found it, brought it back to England, cultivated, nurtured, and cultured, but he didn't hybridize. And then he registered it in 1768. It's our oldest peony in the garden. This is another single lovely rose. Just beautiful. And it really looks rosy, not just the color, but the way it opens here. It looks almost like a rose getting ready to open in your rose garden. So that's another feature. This is a single. This is White Innocence. This is the first time it's ever bloomed. Last summer it was, I'm going to show with my hand, this tall. And I looked on the thing and it said it gets 48 inches tall. And I said, well, not likely. And it's now 58 and climbing. It's even 10 inches taller than it's supposed to be. And that could be that it's thriving in this garden. So here's another example of a single, Sonoma Sun. Again, it's an Itoh. We have 13, I believe, or maybe 13 Itohs in the garden. They are terribly expensive because they come from this impossible hybrid that was a cross between the tree and the herbaceous. And you would, that's a single, then it has the stamens on the inside and guard petals. And I guess 2 rows of guard petals would be a good way of putting it. And the colors change a little bit as it emerges from the bud. The Itohs, remember for people that have watched before, the Itoh buds had that little point like a tree peony. And this isn't a monster-sized one, but it's beautiful, beautiful flower. This, I believe, was also a single. And here are the guard petals. This is another Itoh. And we purposely flanked. We had a garden friend, Madeline Mazurski, who helped us with placement of certain peonies. Some surprised all of us. And this is an Itoh flanking the bump out here. The bump out is so people can get a little closer to the inside peonies without having to step in the garden, because that would be a mess. And labels would start flying and plants would start getting accidentally wounded. Now, at first look, one might think that this is Scarlet Heaven. It's also an Itoh. I'm not trying to show only Itohs. It's just the bloom forms we're especially interested in. That inside it looks similar, but now those stamens are starting to evolve in the direction of petals. And you can't tell it so much, but people who know more than I do for sure. So it's not just a simple stamen, it's called a staminode. Staminode is heading in the direction of evolving toward the double peony that we all love and know in our gardens. But this has, again, the guard petals, and maybe it has starts to have a little more complexity in the guard petals and the inner guard petals, like moving in the direction of something we'll talk about later called the semi-double. But this staminodes is one of the defining characteristics. This is one of the most famous in this garden anyway, and it just opened maybe 3 days ago. So already you see the plant, it's blooming like crazy. When they start opening, they pop. This is maybe even the best, but there's 3 different phases right here in this. So when it first opens, it has that tight center, and then it starts relaxing the center. And look at this one here, has these curlicues. So now these stamens are becoming staminodes. I'm going to make sure that Walter Maines is in fact Japanese. So give me a second. Walter Maines, Japanese, yes. Single, I'm going to read the definition of single. 5 or more broad petals surround pollen-bearing stamens and seed-bearing carpels. We're not looking at a single right now, we're looking at a Japanese, but that's fine. But the Japanese says the guard petals surround staminodes, appearing as miniature petals. So these little guys start to look more like petals than just a little yellow pollen-bearing stamen coming up out of the center of the flower, of the bloom. So that's Japanese, that's the next one. And this is a great example. If we move back here, we have another single. I want to be sure, Friendship, such a beautiful peony. The whole plant has been, and these flowers endure. This has been hanging like this. Of course, Montana isn't super hot to bake them, but Friendship as a single. 1955 was its patent, if you want to call it that, its registration, probably with the American Peony Society. Such a beautiful foliage, strength, flowers, blooms, but here you have, these are still stamens. And the guard petals are very simple, beautiful, elegant. So the single peonies are just as beautiful as anything. Okay, now we're going to move to, let me get my examples. The next form is the anemone. So now we are looking at the anemone, the third evolution, if you will, or classification up in the bloom form, from single to Japanese to anemone. Yes, and they are so elegant and beautiful, and it isn't always bicolor like this, that I know of at least, but here you see the guard petals. Here you see the bud, and then the guard petal, and then the opening of the guard petals, and then it reveals the not stamens and not staminodes, but now they're really becoming petals instead of functional stamens. I don't even know if the plants are fertile. I think there's a little bit of pollen maybe in there somewhere, but hidden down in, but these are petaloids. So we had stamens, and next in Japanese we had staminodes, and in the anemone we get petaloids, and you see that they're looking more and more like petals. But because they are basically guard petals and modified or evolved stamens into petaloids, we now have the anemone. They're kind of more rare, at least in our garden. We only have a few examples and they aren't really blooming too much yet. Okay, so that's the anemone. That is a semi-double. And it's beautiful too. Here we're looking at beautiful color variations as well as variant forms, kind of categorizations of forms. Again, they can evolve, so they'll even the professionals say, well, this is kind of that and it's also kind of this. But the semi-double will go back to having pollen stamens, so it's got something that distinctively is not just petaloids in the middle like we just showed, but this has the original kind of little pollen stamens. And then the center, so it has a distinctive center surrounded by guard petals, but also inner rows, or whorls you maybe could call them, of inner petals. So it's kind of moving in the direction of a full double peony, but it's got some qualifications. I'm going to read what it says about the semi-double. The prominent pollen-bearing stamens are intermixed with large petals. And then there's also the guard. Anyway, it's so beautiful, though, a semi-double. So that's a nice classification. Then we move, you would think, to the double, but in between, and here we're getting a good example opened, this is the bomb. Now, it says about bomb, a mound of smaller petals bursts from the center with large guard petals of the same color. So the guard petals and the center burst are the same color, but look in between. Looks like you got petaloids maybe. I don't know, but we have several examples of the bomb. Here is an example. This is worth looking up. Hillary is a semi-double. So let's review just quickly. Maybe that's how we'll do today. Just a few examples. The garden is so pretty. And this is just a lovely flower. Itoh has magnificent, huge flowers. Look at the size of the flower compared to my hand. It's the size of my hand. It could reach an octave if it wanted to. And here it is in an earlier bloom. The color even evolves a bit as it opens. It's such a striking color. So Hillary is a semi-double, and therefore it has the pollen-bearing stamens, not petaloids, not staminodes, but regular old stamens plus the outer guard petals and other petals as well. Such a beautiful, and it's the Itoh, which is the hybrid. This is Miss America. Look at that bouquet, wonderful bouquet of blooms. And this is a semi-double. So how did it get to be a semi-double? It has the pollen-bearing stamens, and they aren't staminodes, they aren't petaloids, they're still considered stamens. And it has several rows of, oh, Gary, hi, come on and help us. Okay, let's go look. This is Miss America as a semi-double. Goldilocks is an anemone. This is kind of fun to notice. It's the first time we've ever seen this flower bloom. And look, we get one only, or two. Do I see another bud? Yes, next week. So this is an anemone approaching a, wait a minute, a bomb double. So anemone means the petaloids and the guard petals. But if it's bursting from the center, it's starting to do bomb-like things. And for some reason they call it a bomb double. And maybe a different nursery will give it a different classification, but they don't get to decide. It has to be a bigger decision. Oh, this is new. Many Happy Returns. Many Happy Returns. Is this the first year for Many Happy Returns or second?
It's third.
Third year? It bloomed every year, but it's not, it's... Many Happy Returns is, it's considered a double bomb. So it's bursting from the center, like Angel Cheeks was over there, and it's in position E. Garden E is this big triangle garden. We are moving. We've done the bomb, at least one example, and this now is the full double. After the bomb comes the full double, and that's where everything is basically unified into guard petals, and inner petals are now the same color, I think, in general, maybe always. That's something I'm learning. But now these full doubles are what we often think, oh, I love that peony. Looks like the Kleenex peonies kids made in the 4th grade to learn how to use their Kleenex for something other than their noses. This is a full double. And this is now looking like a white flower. It's called Salmon Beauty, but you can see vestiges of the salmon color. When it first opens, it's just this brilliant salmon color. Just the color of your wonderful Copper King, what do they call that? Copper River salmon from Alaska? The ones that are really wild caught. Red Supreme is just a great specimen. Red Supreme is a full double, so that everything inside is petals now. You don't even have to say it's a stamen or a staminode or a petaloid, it's a petal. So once they're petals and they're inside there and they're all gloriously colored with the same as a guard petal, maybe that's mandatory, then it's a double. There's nothing except the beauty, unified color, but that great form. This is Christmas Velvet. And this is just a perfect name for this because the red and the green together look like your favorite Christmas card in full, vivid color. And these are doubles. I better make sure. But it's got the inside petals the same color and the same unified unification. Christmas Velvet. I'm getting to it here. Just a second. This is the first time it's bloomed. So we're happy for that. This is our 3rd summer. And there's Gary's favorite flower over here, the red grace. And last year it had only 3 flowers. This is a good 5. Oh yes, the peony thief took, how many?
3.
The peony thief took 3. We have a peony thief. We're not pleased about that.
And this year?
Mm-hmm. Last year we knew it was she because we caught her one night from a distance. But this year we're there. Whoever it is, they're using their fingernail. This had 5 blooms last year. Look at it this year, 19. We counted them. And they last. I mean, all 19, by the time this one gets open, this may still be not just, they don't just go away after a day. This has been blooming for a week. So come soon. Right next to it this is fabulous color too, the red rose. And this is, I'm going to start wishing I could tell you just by looking, but I'm going to look to be sure. Semi-double. So it has those pollen centers, and it has here's a beautiful example here, just in its perfect, graceful, kind of still curvaceous outer guard petals. So that's lovely. Red rose right next to red grace. Here is this beautiful, beautiful bloom. And this is Hephaestus, a tree peony, and that means it has bark down at the bottom, a tree trunk right there, you see. harder than a stem. It's considered a full double. That's interesting. So I can't tell you why, because the center's very much showing. That one's losing its petals.
Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful flower. I mean, it's
somebody just to clean up the petals.
yeah, I know. The size of it, look at though, my hand and then the flower, way bigger than my hand. Wow. I mean, that could reach an octave and a half at the piano. That's what I do. Try to reach for 10 notes, and that would be more than 10 notes. Oh, Shirley Temple is coming on really strong for the first time. And Shirley Temple is a double rose. Look at that. And I can't tell you for sure what makes it a rose, but this has a little flounce coming up out of the middle, as well as the what I would call something like petaloids in the guard and inner guard petals, let's call them maybe. And then here is our Itoh that is like maybe some consider the most splendid Bartzella. So it comes from tree and herbaceous cross, and the flower again is the size of a dinner plate. It's just incredible, and they last quite well, and it's just a favorite for people that want to have an Itoh in their garden. This is the standard old, my mom got one on her wedding day, Festiva Maxima. Her great aunts, her aunties, my great aunts, gave her starts of Festiva Maxima. And this one, and you are able to smell anything that's you don't have to walk in the garden for. So this one has a great, wonderful fresh fragrance. I wouldn't call it maybe a perfume as much as a fragrance, something like that. Lauren, L-A-U-R-E-N. See, this is called Japanese, but I think it's evolved past Japanese, because instead of staminodes, it seems to have petaloids. So we're going to research that a little bit. But look at this cute little unique quality that it can get a little burst out of the very middle. And that's in bed D. And here's a beautiful example of Mackinac Grand, which I believe is a single, but I'm going to check because it could be evolved. Single, it is a single. So here's a single, still has the total pollen-bearing stamens, and that's probably the quality. They aren't yet staminodes. This is called a staminode in some classification, but I think it's a petaloid. So I get to argue. But it's sort of like what's hot and what's cold in your water faucet. You can have every temperature. So all of these flowers will do their own thing. This is opening for the first time, I think. Pom-pom, pink pom-pom. And Gary says it's a double, maybe a bomb. But I don't have the classification of that, so I won't say, but it's coming on for the first time. Carl Rosenfield came on last year. Oh, this is a great flower. Top brass. The peony thief took the only bud last year home. Only I got to see it because I got a picture of it before she stole it. And we knew it was she because we watched her leave the garden one night before we realized what she had stolen. We watched her walk away with her black hair and her long black ponytail, but a lot of people fit the description. But we saw her knife glinting in the sun after she was about 100 feet from us. And she obviously had taken the flower. We found the petal an hour later of one of the guard petals on the grass where she'd exited.
Something like Whopper in that it has the little ring of yellow petals, and then it has these other little petaloids, bigger or regular petals coming up like a rooster. Those
the roosters.
Those chickens
the comb,
the
comb kind of.
Like a French, what do you call
poof.
it?
Yeah,
a poof.
Yeah, top brass does that. That's why it's different.
Yeah, it's
and
great.
Whopper's the same.
This
way.
has some fragrance, doesn't it?
What happened with this one, Steve?
Yeah, this has another fragrance.
Somebody just put it out of the
Is the most fragrant one open yet?
No, Maxine, Souvenir de Max. If you want to put that one on there, you could. Did you get Dutel?
No, this is the first time we're getting Dutel.
That's a very
And you see how the first year they just give us a little hint of what's to come in the future. What year is this? The second year peony?
No, just put it last year.
It was put in last summer. So it's happy to be here. Dutel. And I'll make sure what it is. Dutel is Japanese. So I'm still trying to figure out the difference between a staminode and a petaloid, but it hasn't crossed over yet to the petaloid. Yeah, look at that display. This bed was struggling last year and it still is a little bit. We're solving some water problems because it's the lowest of the garden and it seems to get the subterranean flow of water. So we're modifying its watering needs, or meeting its watering needs, actually, with some adjustments to our watering system. So there's the whole garden. Well, thanks for tuning in. There's so much information that if you can make sense of it, come to the garden, bring, you could actually go online, not even just to the Facebook Reinhardt Peony Garden page, which you can, but you can go online to Adelman's Peonies and you can download. You could actually download in your own system this 2018 catalog. And this is the catalog from which maybe 70 to 80% of our plants came from, because they specialize in fabulous peony roots that become these plants. So we planted some in pots and they've had a little more trouble establishing that they were in pot when we planted them, and they don't do as well, or haven't done as well, as the actual roots that you plant in October usually. So maybe we'll have a session sometime about how to plant and how deep to plant and different things. But you can come and enjoy this garden, and this is the time for the next 10 days. Today is June 12th or 13th. Which is it? Whatever. It's COVID time. It's middle of June, and this is peak, but it's going to remain peaked because there's probably 70 that haven't even bloomed yet. Here's a little example. Some people won't let the first and second year ones bloom, but because this is a public garden, we're trying to be sure the bloom is what it said it was, and we're also trying to let people enjoy, and it seems not to be hurting. Okay, so that's a summary. Come and look in the next 10 days until June 25th, let's say, you'll be hitting a peak. So this peony we're going to look at, Cytherea, is for some people the most gorgeous peony ever, anywhere on the planet. And it only has 3 blooms. How many did Cytherea have last summer, Gary? 1? Did Cytherea bloom last summer?
1 flower.
1 flower. And now we have 3, and next year I bet we'll have 12. And that's what they do. But it's a semi-double, which means it has its stamens. See the little pollen guys there waiting for the bees. And then it has its complex guard and inner petals. And it's just this vibrant, what color would you call that? Fuchsia? Gary, is this sort of fuchsia colored? Coral. Thank you, guys. Coral colored. And this is the most recent bloom, so you see it fades a little bit, but it's hanging. It came out maybe 5 days ago, the first bud. Now all 3, and that's it for this year. So tell your friends, come to this garden. It's quite amazing. Just get a beautiful panorama of this wonderful. It's just sun coming through, a nice little breeze.